Now we will talk about the money which we owe to others. In other words, the things which we can deduct, our liabilities, our debts, these things, what can we deduct, what can we not deduct? So if it's an immediate debt, something which is already due, then this can be deducted in full. Yeah. Yeah. So you can deduct the total amount. Yeah. So this will be, for example, if a person has a personal loan, anything which is outstanding. So it's not about future liabilities. So if, for example, rent is due next month, the month after, we can't deduct that because that's not due yet. But if this month's rent is already due, our zakat date comes around, our nisab date comes, and we've already received the invoice or the total or the date which we've already have to pay for by, then we can deduct that. If tax is already due, we can deduct that. The bills that we have, if they're already due, then we can deduct that, but not future bills. So not next month's bill or the whole year's bills. We can't deduct that. Um, Now, what happens is that one thing to understand about debts in general is that traditionally or classically, debts were considered to be a burden upon a person. So generally, it was mentioned that debts can be deducted in full. However, in our modern society, what happens is that debt is managed over time, especially commercial loans or um, types mortgages and other loans that we have, student loans, one. So what the ulama mention is that if it's a long-term debt, so something which has no particular deadline, so it's just over a long period of time, then uh, it's only if a person intends to pay that off within the next 12 months. So for example, a husband has to pay his dawah to his wife, um, and they never set a date when he's going to pay by, but he intends that he's going to pay within the next 12 months, then he can deduct that, otherwise he can't. Now, we have other types of debts, some of which are not even permissible, but we can talk about it later or another time, inshallah. But you have mortgages, student loans, and so on. Now, these we can't deduct in full. You can only deduct what is due by the next nisab date, which is if it's monthly payment, it'll either be 12 months, 12 payments, or 11 payments, depending on when it falls. So until the next nisab date, that's all we can deduct. However, based on the principle that debt is like a yoke around a neck or a burden on a person, some ulama even mention of the opinion that you can only do 1 month. Yeah. However, the more majority opinion is that it's 12 months. But the point being that is if a person is in the position that it can easily afford to, then you should only really deduct 1 month, because it's not really a burden upon a person. Because by law, the company or whoever we owe the money to can't come and ask for the rest of the debt. It can only ask for that 1 month within the month. Yeah. Or within 12 months, they can only ask for 12 months of payments. Nothing more than that. Okay. However, when it comes to interest, firstly, a person should never be involved in an interest-based transaction. If a person is involved in such a transaction, we cannot deduct interest. Yeah. As a liability, we don't consider it. By Sharia, it's not counted. Even if a person agrees to pay interest, it's still haram to pay interest. We can't agree to pay interest in the first place. So we can't deduct interest. So when it comes to calculator, you have to go back and consider only the principal amount that is owed. Home purchase plans, some of them, you know, I call them home purchase plans because sometimes people call them halal mortgages or Islamic mortgages. They're not really Islamic for a start. Halal is debatable, so we need to find out whether it's even halal in the first place. So make sure that it is. But you have something called murabaha. So the loan is considered a debt, so you can treat it as a debt, and only 12 months can be deducted. Um, when it comes to ijara or diminishing musharaka, if anyone has that, this is not a loan or a debt, so you can only deduct the rental payments, which is already due. Okay. Now let's move on to recipients, the people who can receive zakah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran in one ayah 8 categories of people. Out of these, some are abrogated, they don't really apply. But I want to highlight 3 of them. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين. Yeah, the poor and the needy. Yeah. They are generally the most in need of our zakah. And also the ones who are in debt. The ones who are in debt. Yeah. In other words, their debt consumes them so much that they're in negative equity. So they have less than either less than nisab, or they're actually in zero, below zero. So the poor, the destitute, the needy, these are the ones we should give our zakat to. Now, how do we decide? How do we determine whether a person can receive zakat or not? So we have to look at their net assets. So this is a different calculation from the one we did for working out whether we pay zakat. Okay, this is a different calculation. How does it differ? We also have to look at the surplus assets. So we don't just look at the zakatable assets. We look at also anything which is extra beyond their basic needs. So something which you don't use on a daily basis, or something which is extra. There's extra furniture in the house. There's extra appliance in the house. There might be an extra vehicle, a car, anything. Anything which is extra, which they don't need on a daily basis, or is not part of the necessities, then we have to include that in the calculation to determine their net assets and whether they're above or below nisab. Okay. So the obviously basic necessities would be their house and the car and furniture, everything which they use on a daily basis. So what that would mean is that if the person's zakatable assets are below nisab, but when you add the surplus assets, it comes above nisab, and those surplus assets you don't pay zakat upon. Yeah. But because that brings them above nisab, it means that there is a category of people who don't pay zakah, but they can't receive zakah either. You understand? So we'll explain that with an example. Okay. Or 2 examples. So this person Zaid, he has £1,000 in cash, but he has £900 of debts, yeah, which he owes to other people, and these are personal loans. And personal loans can be deducted in full. So if we owe money to friends and family, so that means his net assets are £100. 1,000 minus 900, £100. So he can receive zakah. Okay. Now, another person, he has £500. He has £1,000 or in his £1,000 in debt. So 500 minus 1,000, that's minus 500. Okay, so he's below. He seems to be below nisab. However, he's got a second car. Yeah. So he's got one car which he uses on a daily basis. He uses all the time, is a necessity. But he also has a second car, and that car is worth 1,500. So he was minus 500, but then that car brings him his net assets to 1,000, which is above the nisab. So he can't receive zakah. Yeah? But he doesn't pay zakah either, because you don't pay zakah on a car. Yeah? You don't pay zakah on cars unless it's actually for sale. You know, it's a trade stock. Okay, there are some people who would otherwise be eligible to receive zakah. However, they can't receive zakah for an external reason. One is the descendants of Abbas, Harith, Ali, Ja'far, and Aqil, anhum, they cannot receive zakah. Yeah. However, if they are poor, they should be helped. So we can help them through gifts and other means. And there are some charities and some initiatives which look after the Ahlul Bayt. So we should look after them, but not through sadaqah and zakah. Now, for an individual, his ascendants, descendants and spouse, they cannot receive zakat from him. However, other people, other third parties can give zakat to them. So we can't give zakat to our own parents, grandparents, and our children. However, someone else could give zakat who's not really directly related to them, could give zakat to them. Yeah. And besides these, our descendants and spouse, our other relatives. So notice there's no brother and sister mentioned there. So we could give to our own brother and sister if they are in need. And in fact, it would be preferable to give to them. Rather than give to other people, it would be better to give to our own relatives, as long as they're not our really close relatives, which we can't give to. So some conditions of zakah. Number one is intention. When we take out zakah, we should intend to give zakah. And either we give it at the moment whilst we're giving the zakah, or if we set out the money aside, then we can make the intention at that point. And the intention must be made before the recipient has spent the money. Yeah. So if we hadn't made the intention and we give the money, then as long as the money is still in possession, we can make the intention. And obviously, as we mentioned about the eligibility of recipient, we have to make sure that the person is eligible to receive zakah, and that's our responsibility. So we have to make sure we make the inquiries and make sure. And if we're unsure, then it's better that we give some other form of money to them, some nafil sadaqah or lillah, something, and give it zakah to other places where we can be sure that our zakah has been fulfilled. The other thing to bear in mind is the full ownership. The full ownership must be given to that person. We can't set conditions or have partial ownership. So that is why we can't give to a well, because one individual won't own a well. That will be a communal property. We can't give to a masjid, a hospital. With a hospital, it would depend. If the hospital manages it properly, then it can be possible. What they would have to do is that keep a separate zakat fund, and if a poor person comes and they can't afford the medication, then they would give the money and make the poor person the owner of the money, which they can use to pay the fees for the medical. You can't use it to pay the doctors and nurses' fees and the running costs of the hospital. Okay, so the full ownership is very, very important. So that means that it has to be a person. We have to give zakat to a person, people. Yeah, we can't give it to buildings and properties and so on. And we can't use it to pay for any admin costs, running costs of a charity. Unfortunately, some charities do misuse zakat funds and use it for other purposes. So it's very important that we choose carefully who we give our zakat to. However, charities do have running costs. So it's important that we support the charities. So don't just give zakat and just leave it at that. What about all the running costs related to distributing that zakat? So we should either gift it our donations, and if that's not possible, then perhaps give some money separately to an admin fund so they can make sure that they can easily distribute that zakat. And better still, we can go ourselves physically and distribute ourselves by hand. That's even better. Okay, so at this link, there's a zakat calculator which you can use for calculating out zakat. So let's go through a quick example. Okay, so the house, is zakat due upon the house? No. Okay, there's no zakat due upon that. A car, right? Is zakat due? Yeah. Bank? Yes. So zakat is due on that. Yeah, on the full amount. Yeah. Zakat due? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. And zakat? Yes. Okay. On investment property? investment property, on the property. So you got a property which you give out on rent. Is zakat due on that? No, not on the property. On the rental payments that a person receives, you pay zakat, but not on the property. You could have 10 properties. You could have a massive property portfolio, or even 100 properties, right? But if they're all on rent, then there's no zakat due on those properties. On the rental income, yes, but not on those properties. Zakat, yes or no? Yeah. Okay. Yes or no? Yes. Right. What about this? Money owed to supplier. What happens there? What do we do? Do we pay zakat? This is money owed to a supplier. So that's actually kind of trick one. It's not about whether zakat is due upon that or not. It's actually something which is deductible. Okay. Yeah. So we deduct that. We can deduct that amount. So if we add up the ones in green, yeah, quick calculation, anyone? Yeah, I'll try to make it as easy as possible, right? And deduct 20,000. So that comes to 60 minus 20. Okay, so 40,000. And 40,000 was 2.5% of 40,000. Or easier way, what's that divided by 40? Yeah, 1,000. Yeah. So the total amount due is 1,000 on all of that. Okay. Miss zakah. If a person has missed zakah, and we could also include in that, for the example I gave yesterday about a person who's not paid the zakah on money which is lent to others over a number of years. So we should calculate for each year that we missed, and then we can also deduct the zakah liability for each year. So, for example, if it was £1,000, £25 is due. So the following year, you don't necessarily need to pay on £1,000, but you can deduct the £25. So the next year it would be 975, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But it's very important, obviously, for the missed zakah, a person has forgot to pay zakah or whatever, then is must pay immediately and also do tawbah for missing. Okay, on this link, because obviously that calculation is kind of a bit difficult to do 975 and then pay zakah on 975 and then work out what the amount would be the following year. You can just use this calculator, which can work it out for you. Unpaid zakat calculator. Okay. And to finish off, prepaying zakah is permissible, so we can pay beforehand, but we intend for the following year. And what we do is that when we get to that point, we still calculate on our nisab date. We still calculate how much zakat was due. Now, if we underestimate it, then we have to make up that shortfall when we get to that point. We can also disguise zakah as a gift, because sometimes people may be embarrassed to accept zakah, but they're actually in need. Yeah? So we can disguise it as a gift and just give it to our relatives or friends or so on. But it's still zakah. Okay, remember, zakah is an individual obligation. So in the family, you have the husband, the wife, and the children, adult children. You can't just pool all the money together and give zakah in one lump sum. Yeah. Because it may be that the husband has debts, yeah, and the debts may be such that it reduces the amount so that the zakah is not fulfilled if we do it individually. Yeah. So it's important that each individual, and to do that, it's important that we establish ownership of all the wealth which each person possesses. Yeah. So like with inheritance, the same principle applies here, that each individual, the husband needs to have their own separate wealth, the wife, the separate. Now, we may have joint accounts, yeah, but we determine the share. Yeah. So if it's 50%, then halve it. So when it comes to husband's calculation, then he halves that amount in that bank account and adds it to his total, and the other half goes to the wife's total. Yeah. She may have gold, right? So that's her own obligation, yeah, and her own separate total. The son, he may be in debt, yeah. We don't include that debt on the for the father's calculation, and so on. Okay, so to summarize, yeah, the nisab date is extremely important. That is the date in when we first reach nisab. When we first reach nisab, so for example, for someone who's not baligh yet or just reaches below, or someone who was in debt before and now has reached nisab, then that nisab date, the hijri date, is very important. That's the date we have to remember. If we can't remember, then estimate, go back and check our accounts and check and estimate to the best of our ability. If that's not possible, then fix one hijri date. Usually people fix the first of Ramadan, whatever it is. But sometimes what people do is they'll fix Ramadan, but they fix any date in the month. So sometimes one year they'll do first of Ramadan, and another year they'll do 10th of Ramadan, another time they'll do 20th, right? That's not correct. Yeah. It's one date, one particular date, because if any wealth becomes before that date, then that's included in the zakat calculation. If it comes after that date, it's not included. Right? So it's very important that we stick to one date. Okay, and we total up all our zakatable assets. Yeah, also include any money which is owed to us. Deduct anything which is owed to others, which we can deduct. Yeah, and then pay 2.5% of the total, and try to pay as soon as possible. But the limit should be by the next nisab date. So 1 lunar year is the maximum limit. So that concludes the presentation. If there's any questions, then feel free to ask. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us true understanding of His deen and gives us the ability to fulfill this important obligation in a manner which is pleasing to Him. Akhir da'wana alhamdulillah. Any questions? We can ask later.